So, hi, this is Miguel Sanchez from the Transformers Foundation, and welcome to our streaming today on this season of what we call The Truth. Our episode today is going to be about waste and circularity, and we have we are so lucky to have a great group of panelists, a great panel of experts, and a wonderful moderator, Karla Magruder. She's an expert, an absolute global expert on waste and reducing impact on environment from misused or appropriately disposed textiles. So welcome all. It's my pleasure to have you all on today. Thanks for the first time for being here with us today. And okay, so we'll go and introduce Karla and the other panelists with us today, and Amy, which is also there on the screen. And Joan is not visible, but she's here, believe me. She's with us. So, hi, Karla.
Nice to be here.
Welcome to The Truth, and thanks for accepting the invitation to be the moderator of this panel. Karla is the founder of Accelerated Circularity. Is an organization that helps to reduce waste and all the embedded materials and resources and everything that have been used to produce certain garments can be converted into new garments again. So this is millions of tons of waste saved every year, and a lot of emissions as well. So it's a tough fight, but it's very important for the planet. Then we have Eva Engelen from Honest. Honest is one of the leading brands on circularity. As you know, is repeated many times, is on their DNA to recycle and reuse from the buttons, the trims, the fibers, and everything. They are experts on adopting recycled materials for their styles, and they do that with wonderful design. So Eva, welcome, and thanks very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Then we have Ronald from Reverse Resources, is a company in Estonia, which is, for us is double pleasure because it's the first time we have a representative from the Baltics in our events. So welcome. Reverse Resources is a global platform for handling waste in the right way. So it's a textile waste network that includes recyclers, waste handlers, and manufacturers to have a good circulation of waste to be redistributed again as recycled material for reusing. And welcome again, and thanks so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then we have Michael Kinemont, a very good friend. Hi, Michael. So Michael is representing Lenzing, which is a company that is very innovative in presenting recycled materials in different ways. I mean, they are on programs to recycle post-consumer textiles to be again part of new fresh fibers to be used in the market again as new. I can mention Refibra, for example, as one of the most interesting projects that they have been working on, and they continue working on that. Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
Nice to be here. Hi.
Hi. Okay, thank you. And Amy is our communication manager. She's responsible for everything that we communicate, we pass to the media, everything that we inform, everything. Amy is behind everything that is sent out to media and the audience out there from the Transformers Foundation. Hi, Amy.
Thanks, Miguel.
Now you have to tell us
Yes, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'm sure there's going to be many questions along the way for this great group of panelists we have here today, but we ask you put them in the Q&A box. The chat has been disabled, and we will be answering these at the end of the discussion. So please do submit them during the panel, but we will get to them at the end. And I'll be disappearing in a few minutes or a few seconds, but you'll see me at the end to help answer and field these questions. So thank you. And
yeah, thanks, Annie. Okay, so now it's time to start with the discussion. So Karla is going to take over now the lead of the managing of the panel. And okay, I'll disappear as well myself. So thanks again to all of you. And there we go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Miguel. Miguel, Annie, and Joanne have really done a lot of good work in getting us set up here. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with Anne, Eva, and Michael about waste and circularity. To kick us off, let's make sure we're all on the same page, right? I'm a big fan of definitions, so I'd like to start to make sure we're clear that when we say waste, we're talking about post-consumer and post-industrial waste for the most part. At Accelerating Circularity, we like to think of these as spent textiles, textiles whose useful life has come to an end and now are appropriate to be used as feedstock for recycling in a circular system. Of course, we also have to remember that when we speak about circularity, recycling is only one of many circular business models that includes reducing your use of materials, reusing materials, resale products, repair, and then recycling. We often work with what we call the textile waste hierarchy, which says that our first goal is actually to reduce, second is reuse, and then comes recycling. So while it's really important, we're really sort of low man on the totem pole, but we do recognize that eventually everything does come to its end of life. And so that recycling is going to be an incredibly important tool. And then I think Miguel mentioned it a little bit in the introduction. We have to put textile waste into perspective. So I've got some numbers in the US. I'm sorry for the people on the phone in Europe, but numbers in Europe are significant, although not quite as big as the United States. But in the US alone, the EPA estimates that the volume of textile waste going into landfill and incineration is somewhere around 17 million tons a year. That's million tons. This includes carpet, footwear, accessories, right? So in our industry, you know, we think mostly about apparel or home textiles. So if you take out those carpets, footwear, and accessories, you're still at around 11 million tons, right? These are staggering numbers. And according to the Environmental Research and Education Foundation, the average landfill price per ton in the US for landfilling is $54 a ton, right? So Americans are throwing away or paying $700 million annually to throw away our textiles. I think all of us know that there are certainly better things to do. At Accelerating Circularity, we also talk about the fact that textiles are too good to waste, and I might add, too expensive if we look at these numbers. So recently I've been reading a book and it's called The Business of Less. It talks about net green, and it's the idea that we have to look at all the impacts that are included in a product, right? But not only the impacts that are in a product, but also the impacts by what happens when we change those products, right? All of the different aspects. So there are three basic ways that we can change a product, which aligns fairly closely with the waste hierarchy. There is some differences, but those three things are making it different, which is replacing one material for one we think is more sustainable, using it again, which is where recycling and reuse comes in, and then using less, which is all about that reduction, right? Or being able to make a product that's an equivalent, but yet still has the performances that we require. One of the main concepts that I got out of this book is our need to recognize the interconnectedness of all things. And I really think that when we start talking about circular systems, it's the perfect step in our industries so that we recognize how connected all things are. So I'm really excited to see how using materials again in this recycling system plays a role in circularity with our guests here today. So I think Joanne, she's going to kick it off with a video that she pulled together for us, and I think will be an interesting to kick off our questions. Joanne?
कपड़े हर तरह के आते हैं यहाँ। जैसे बाहर अमेरिका से, इटली से, फ्रांस से ऐसे आते हैं दूर दूर से। तो इसी का धागा बन के ही जाता है वापस। मतलब अंदर से चाहना होती है भी इनको देखें, जैसे भी देखें कैसे अंग्रेज होते हैं, कैसे बोलते हैं। तो हम इसकी शॉर्टिंग करते हैं, रंग अलग अलग करते हैं।
कोई भी आता है ना पहली बार इधर, वो ऐसा ही बोलता है कि कपड़े सारे किधर से आते हैं, क्यों आते हैं इतने कपड़े, ऐसा ही बोलता है। पहना भी नहीं होता ये कपड़े। इधर भी ऐसा ही बोलते हैं सब कि उधर पानी की कमी इसलिए इधर आता है, ये सब ऐसा ही बोलते हैं।
पानी जितने में ये लोग पानी खरीदते हैं ना, उतने में वो लोग कपड़े खरीद सकते हैं। इसलिए 2-4 बार ये कपड़े यूज करके फिर वो फेंक देते हैं। ऐसे सब बोल रहे हैं, वही हम सुन रहे हैं और किसी ने नहीं बताया।
पता नहीं उसको कपड़े धोने अच्छे लगते हैं या नहीं, या क्या बातें हो तो पता नहीं।
हमें तो अच्छा लगता है, अभी अच्छी इज्जत है, जिंदगी तो भगवान ने इनको दे रखी है जो औरतों को, इतने ऐश आराम से रह रही हैं। हम भी मन में ये सोचते हैं भी काश हमारी भी ऐसी जिंदगी होती। नहीं तो सारा दिन कपड़े फाड़ने पड़ते हैं, ऐसे ऐसे देखने पड़ते हैं।
So I think it's pretty obvious by that video that there is a lot of confusion about recycling and what it means and where it comes from. I want to start by asking this first question to both Michael and Anne. Michael, what would you want a brand to know about recycling that's misunderstood today from our Western perspective?
Hi, Carla. Well, this is called the Truth Series, and the truth is that there needs to be a reality check, I would suggest. I don't know if this is misunderstood, but I think the first point to be made is that if we're going to make this initiative to recycle, if we're going to scale it, then we all have to be in it together, because it's really a systemic change and it really needs a collective and coordinated push from everybody, suppliers, designers, brands, retailers, right across the value chain. It can't be the usual standard operating system of the supply chain, investing time, money, IP in developing a solution and being met with a tired old euphemism from brands and retailers that the solution has to be cost neutral. I'd say the second point I'd like to make is that in reality, the textile, let's call it recovery infrastructure, is highly fragmented and really in its infancy. And I know that initiatives such as Accelerated Circularity are really trying to coax everybody out of their silos and catalyze textile circular supply chains. But as I said before, all parts of the value chain have to engage. And I would say the third point I'd like to make, maybe slightly controversial, but I would like to say that established companies, and let's say Lenzing is one of those, have the technical know-how and scale. this initiative cannot just be about startups. Products from established companies need industry support because they can scale significantly more quickly. Many of the new technologies are ideas that have been around for many years and have not been adopted by established companies for good reason. And the R&D archives of established companies are littered with potentially disruptive products and processes that in the end were just not feasible for commercialization.
Great points, Michael. I really like what you're talking about in terms of systems. We often speak very strongly about systems at accelerating circularity, and also to scale. Those are two really critical things, because this change isn't going to happen unless we can create new systems at scale. And I think you're coming from, it's a great thing, because that's what we want, is these diversity of perspectives. So what do you, from your perspective and the work that you're doing, what would you want a brand to know today about recycling?
Yeah, with Reverse Resources, we are interestingly positioned in a place where we systemically see the viewpoints of all the different stakeholders around recycling. What are the factories thinking? What are the recyclers thinking, the brands? So what Michael just mentioned, that everybody needs to play their role. We see that very often people just don't understand, what do I need to do to make an impact in a meaningful way? And there, that chicken and egg issue is a big problem, that even if we tell them, then they feel like we need to kind of verify it somehow. And I think what is really important for those large brands who are creating the mass stream of the material flow now, they need to understand how important role they hold in asking on behalf of a recycler for the suppliers of the waste, the recyclers, the factories and the sorting centers, to provide that critical background information together with the waste for the recyclers, so that the waste would actually become accessible with the full information. What does it contain? And I think this is actually the missing piece, is the information about waste and the transparency, because it's actually not anymore a tech problem. The technology is there for recycling. It is entering the market. It's not there on scale yet, but it can't be scaled without information. So calling out everybody to provide feedback, background information on waste, and segregating it so that we can actually help those textile-to-textile recyclers to access the waste properly, is currently the missing link.
That's actually, those are great points, because, you know, you use the term chicken and egg, which is my least favorite phrase ever. But at the same time, it's something that gets brought up a lot. And so I think that in circularity, the point is we have to Michael's point, we have to do this together, right? There can't be I'm not going to do it until this happens. Everybody's got to jump in and do it at the same time. So the other question that I think is also important is, so if we're looking at circular business models, how important is recycling to the circular business model, right? How do we pull this all together, Anne?
It's obviously, it is obvious that reuse is always more important than recycling, and recycling cannot be that easy, fixed, fast solution that we run to, because we have all these volumes of waste available. But it is a crucial piece if we want to get to that endless circulation of fiber eventually. We can't achieve that without recycling. Great.
And Michael, do you want to weigh in on that question? We've got a minute left.
Yeah, I think, go back 100 years when most of the industry was in Europe and the US. there was a culture of recycling, just like we saw in the video from India. If you ever go to India, there's a real culture of recycling, and that's been completely lost. I'm an old man now. I'm in my 60s. When I was young, garments were expensive, and my mum would buy me my Sunday best gabardine coat, and it was two sizes too big. And when it was 2 sizes too small, it was handed down to my brothers, and we've lost that. I do remember going back quite some years when the Right Group was going in the UK, and we used to have conferences. One company there was reporting on consumer attitude to clothing. And I remember this one quotation from a single 20-year-old Manchester male, and it went more or less, I buy socks. What am I going to do with them? Wash them. It's too cheap to buy them new. When I go on holiday, I buy a new set of underwear. What am I going to do? Bring them back in my case? I just leave them there. So garments and the attitude of society has become that they're disposable. So recycling has to be important. But it really is down to society, the consumer, brands and retailers to energize this alongside the supply chain, because the supply chain can and will innovate if the demand and the reward is there.
Great. Well, so let's move on to the brand side of things. I think Joanne has another video for us.
Every once in a while, a collection comes along that is too special not to shout about. Introducing H&M's Circular Design Story. Designed with circularity in mind, this killer collection has been created using the Circular Product Development Guideline. Who's ready for some details? Hi, I'm Alva Claire, and this is The Small Things, a space created by H&M to help you and I get technical on things in fashion that really matter. Eastman Naya, a cellulosic fiber that is fully traceable and bio-based, sourced from sustainably managed pine and eucalyptus forests and farms. Eastman Naya Renew, a cellulosic yarn produced with an innovative carbon renewal technology that utilizes hard-to-recycle materials. TextLoop Recycled Cotton, a process that transforms high-value cotton textile waste into recycled cotton and preserves the fiber quality for a next generation of recycled materials. Reprieve Our Ocean, a collection of fiber and resin sourced from ocean-bound bottles. Resortex, a bio-based dissolvable sewing thread that enables clothes to be easily taken apart, sorted, and recycled once they reach the end of their life cycle. Vijaya, a vegan leather-like material created with grapes, and many, many more. Wow, that's a lot of clever material. You've been watching The Small Things with H&M and me, Alva Claire. Don't forget to like and subscribe below for even more nerdy fashion lessons. Bye.
What a great lead into asking Eva these questions. So Eva, welcome. What's the most important element for you when you're designing for circularity?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the most important things is for us is really to start looking at the waste stream we want to, solve, let's say, or we want to diminish. And we have the opportunity to do this because our value chain really starts with collecting pre-loved, worn out jeans from also from other brands. So we're not only working with our own stock of pre-loved jeans, but also we work with jeans from our competition. And this allows us really to kind of see with our own eyes what are the design mistakes, which elements are making it difficult to recycle these garments at scale, and then kind of redevelop and design our product from there. And the main thing that was coming back and back and back and back is that it is essential to keep your products as monomaterial as possible. There are a lot of technologies available that are scaling as we speak to solve some of those issues when you blend materials, but currently at scale, it's still really important to keep things as monomaterial as possible. So that was a big lesson for us, and it really allowed us to kind of design or redesign our products from there.
And so like a follow-on question that is so perfect with the video that Joanne played. Where did you get the most valid information? Sounds like you got some of that from the actual work you're doing, but what are some of the other places where you got information that you thought was valuable in helping you to design for circularity?
Yeah, so we looked at the feedstock. That was really kind of our starting point. So we collected 17 tons of pre-love worn out jeans. And then we looked at it with a spinner, a fabric mill, and a recycler. And really, like, kind of with the ecosystem that we brought together, we really looked at, if we want to recycle these jeans, which elements make it very difficult or impossible. And then when we create these recycled fibers from them, the jeans eventually, which fibers do we need to blend them with to create enough strength in the yarn? And then if we blend the yarns or we weave with another yarn, so we really brought the whole ecosystem together around the table to get knowledge also from the different perspectives. It was a couple of years ago, of course, 3 years ago, that we really started this project. So there was less, and knowledge and information out there that around circularity than there is now. I mean, circularity has really moved from a niche to the mass space in the last year, which is great. So there's more information available now. But back then it was really like a round table, development discussion, R&D project with different ecosystem players.
Actually, I think what you did, was really quite wise, because what you're designing, you're designing for a circular system, but you designed from the circular materials that were available to you with the guidance, right? From
exactly.
So,
and also, and in terms of like how we tweaked the design, it really, like, we saw that the buttons were causing a huge issue. We saw still also that the stretchy fabrics there, where they blend a lot of stretch in the fabrics, that was just already creating a huge waste stream of jeans that we just can't use. And then going further into that as well, like, you have all these elements and the jeans that which is making it very difficult to efficiently recycle them at scale. So we just decided to all get rid of them, keep it as monomaterial as possible, keep it cellulose, and if we do add a material, like for example a button, to keep it make it manually unscrewable or detachable.
Michael or Anne, would you like to weigh in on this topic about, how do brands, or how should brands design for circularity or get information? From your perspectives in terms of designing for circularity.
Well, I think if you engage with, if you find a company is open and they want to discuss with you and they have information on their website and they're as transparent as they can be, they're probably the most reliable companies to engage with. And I think, everybody probably should have your email address, Karla. So, because I think you are becoming the font of all knowledge, or at least you can pass somebody on to somebody who knows. Because we've been in a highly fragmented situation, lots of great work going on, but everybody doing their own little thing and not necessarily aware of anybody else. I think things are a lot better today, but I think the reality is, I have to say that, recycling as part of our industry is really small fry at the moment.
Really, that's really funny. And also too, and you can weigh in, but I do want to sort of, for transparency here, Michael participates in the Accelerating Circularity Steering Committee in the European project, as does Reverse Resources. So we do believe very strongly in sharing information and bringing as many people to the table as possible. All of those things are critical in our mind to circularity. So Anne, do you have some comments as well?
Yeah, I kind of feel like putting in a bit of like a macroeconomic perspective again, because what we see from this statistical data across countries, Europe is kind of trying to solve the problem of post-consumer waste locally. And then, but the way the garments are all coming from Asia, and the industrial waste is not really considered here. And the other way around, although India is now really importing our post-consumer waste there, so it's actually really interesting to see how all these initiatives here and there are kind of misinformed from local context. And if we actually expanded our vision across continents and the material movements, then it's actually would be more relevant to also think of solutions, because on large scale, at some point, these material flows are happening. And then we need to consider that, the feasibility and the economics and all that. So what we are actually doing with post-consumer is informing how the textile-to-textile recyclers, who can be the ones who are feeding new recycled materials into the fashion industry, they actually are much more ready to recycle industrial waste first. Whereas the industrial waste that is now consumed by those low-end downcycling markets in Asia could be using much more efficiently the post-consumer from Europe. And this material exchange could actually help both sides. So this is just a thought that I want to leave.
I think that the interesting thing about that is that, incredible complexity, because we're talking about circularity doesn't mean that the industry still isn't global in some ways, and it has all of these different elements to it. I think Joanne has another video for us as we move on to the next topic.
Raise your hand if you think that we should recycle more. Well, I don't. My question was a trick. My name is Bea Johnson. I'm the author of Zero Waste Home, and since 2008, my family of 4 produces 1 jar of waste per year. Now, when people find out that I live a zero waste lifestyle, they love to tell me that they too recycle everything. Recycling requires energy to process, but it also lacks regulations to coordinate the efforts of manufacturers, consumers, municipalities, and recyclers across the globe. Recycling depends on way too many variables to make it a dependable solution. What we put in our recycling bin is out of our control. For my family, zero waste is not about recycling more. It's actually about recycling less, by preventing waste from coming into our home in the first place. Recycling for us is a last resort. As a matter of fact, zero recycling is a goal. When you eliminate single use from your life, when you buy without packaging, and you stop accepting freebies, then you vote for a healthier, more sustainable, unpackaged world for our children. But better yet, you'll discover a better you.
So I think that is a very interesting lead into, the consumer waste perspective and how consumer waste plays a role in the work that we do. Michael, let's start with you on this one. That was an interesting perspective. You had talked about the need for infrastructure, and this woman, Bea, has suggested that, that's a challenge. So at Lenzing, what does consumer waste play? What kind of role? What's happening there?
Well, all the reports I read, all the chit chat online is all about trying to tackle consumer waste. What I would say is that actually the waste generated industrially in the supply chain prior to even making garments would easily support most recycling initiatives globally. So that's the scale of the problem. And although we as Lenzing, we do recycle post-consumer waste alongside industrial waste, it's not something that is user-friendly. Consumer waste brings the maximum amount of complexity, and the complexity brings inefficiencies, and inefficiencies bring much higher cost. And therefore, there isn't a lot of incentive to try and incorporate consumer waste. I think a lot of the solutions are relatively low tech, but like I said, much higher cost because of these inefficiencies. If the industry, the brands and consumers are willing to pay that cost, I think solutions are there, but it's difficult.
So actually, that's a good lead in for Eva and your perspective on how consumer waste can play a role in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're actually also both using post-consumer and pre-consumer recycled cotton for the creation of our fabric, let's say. And I think it's also important to mention that before we are recycling those pre-loved jeans that we collect as a raw material, we are also really looking at resale. If they're still fit for a second life, we will resell them through social economy partners, and we'll also through a repair service try to prolong the lifespan as long as possible for people who are wearing our jeans. So recycling, or like prolonging the lifespan as long as possible before something becomes waste, it's also really essential to what we do. But then we are using that mix of post and pre-consumer waste for the same reasons that Michael has highlighted. From a sustainability perspective, we prefer to work with post-consumer recycled cotton because we're actually doing something with waste and we're repurposing it. But then from a technical perspective, pre-consumer recycled materials are just they're just a lot easier to work with. And just less contamination from chemicals, from dyes, from material blends. It's just easier, for us also as a brand to work with. More certainty in terms of composition and quality, less costs involved, less issues, less productions that need to be stopped because of contamination or irregularities. So it's a bit of a difficult playing field also as us for a brand, where we need to make specific choices.
That's really, it seems like everybody's aligning here, and I bet Anne must have something to say because they spend a lot of time trying to define these things, right, for recyclers.
Yeah, this story from Bea Johnson is just so much touching me so thoroughly, because this is how personally the whole story started for me, where I try to consume less, make sure that I personally behave well and don't create waste. And I think this mental exercise is so important for anybody in that whole supply chain. From my perspective, to make sure that I waste as little as possible and I reuse, because it's too easy to jump into recycling. Otherwise, as Bea was also saying. So yeah, what we are kind of seeing in our daily work is that often the supply chains of waste movement in the circulation, people who hold that waste, they need to know, how am I participating, which circle am I participating in, so that I can do that right decision. Which bin am I gonna put that piece of material into, so that it would reach the right place? So it is kind of similar to consumers as well as the factories that we work with. How do we segregate, and which recycler are we supporting with, or which reuse case are we prioritizing before we even think about recycling? But eventually, getting to a point where there is no waste at all is very, very difficult in a world like ours right now.
I think it's a really interesting concept because, the next question that we sort of had teed up was this idea about you know, what do we need to know about consumer waste roles in a circular system, which in a sense has been answered, right? Michael had mentioned that, you know, it creates problems. You know, Eva, who's using both post-consumer and pre-consumer product, and Anne, you actually linking up the people to get to use these materials. So if we were to have a perfect world, I think Eva, you mentioned, you talked about making products that are monomaterials. Is that really feasible so that these, you know, consumer waste roles and circularity became easier?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from our perspective, I think it's really essential to implement those design for recycling principles at scale. So we are making the waste stream easier to work with, the post-consumer waste stream. And then next to that, I think what Anne also mentioned already, the need for transparency along the value chain. So we really have information from each step in the value chain, each supplier that works on a product, which materials are they working with, which chemicals are they working with, and then that information being available at the end of life to the recyclers. I think that's also really essential to make it easier to work with those post-consumer waste streams.
I think that leads us right into our next topic about regulations and certifications. And I think also Joanne's got another quick video to show us to lead us into this conversation.
When I give it to a charity shop, I think what I'm hoping will happen is that, you know, my understanding is that they either give it to people who need the clothes or they put it in the shop, basically.
The UK's 70% recycling rate for clothes is one of the best in the world, making an estimated £100 million for charity. But even insiders now want action to stop dumping in developing countries. This trader of used clothes to Africa spoke to me anonymously. He believes unscrupulous dealers can send unsuitable clothing.
Yes, there are people doing that already. That's why the dumps are there. The dump is caused by wrong ones. It is not the good stuff that is supposed to be used.
ITV News has found that over 63 million kilograms of old clothes from the UK were sent to be sold in Ghana last year. Our analysis shows that's doubled in a decade. Overall, exported cast-off clothing from the UK is up more than a third to 301 million kilograms sent to destinations across the globe.
There is an undeniable problem. We've shown you the footage of second-hand clothing dumped.
The clothing coming from operations like this, it should go through a detailed sourcing operation which removes all the recycling grades and any rubbish that's in there. And so really,
well, that's what should happen, but you know, it's not always happening.
No, and there are people that are operating under the radar.
So how do we stop that?
Yeah, well, ultimately we need checks both in the recipient country, but also the government officials in this country.
Exporters around the world are now sending old clothes to places like Ghana, and there's no doubt of the damage waste there can do.
We have to watch where all our materials go, you know. If it's going overseas, we need to be sure that the standards that are applied overseas are the same as we would apply here. Otherwise, we're copping out and not really looking after the environment.
So I think that's a great video, and it's a great lead into the next question, right? Are there regulations and certifications that fit into the circularity landscape? I think I'll start with Anne on this question. You are working, you mentioned earlier, you're working globally, and so you see the kinds of issues that arise. Are there regulations that you think, or certifications that you think are critically important in this area?
Well, so far, the only certification system that we are linked with is the GRS and RCS certificates that verify that a certain garment is made of recycled material. But this is really not yet telling the full story because it doesn't trace the waste to the source. It doesn't explain which waste was used, and it's actually helping along with claiming that PET bottle recycling is somehow good. It doesn't make a difference between PET recycling and textile recycling, for example. So there are huge challenges around that. But the other way around, to verify where that waste is ending up at, I think all those certification systems and this public interest to prove the material flows is kind of coming from the place of consumers and wanting to know, but the industry is looking at it more like a nice to have thing, instead of having like a business a need or a requirement in it. So with reverse resources, we have been kind of looking for those places where the industry itself needs information, and where that information and verification of the information from that business requirement can be turned into verification that can be used for certification. So in that sense, for example, we are suggesting to GRS to extend that trace from the source of waste, but we start from the question, how is that data from the source actually relevant and useful for the recycling that can later be used for certification.
Great. I think that's interesting. So your focus was primarily on the certification. Michael, I'm going to ask you about, how do you feel maybe about certifications, but do you see the need for regulation when it comes to, circularity and materials being shipped around the world?
Yeah, well, on certifications, we comply with the certificates that exist. For our products, we put something in our fiber where it's completely traceable, but I still don't think that the certification process is really robust enough, and I think leaving the responsibility to create a circular system to the industry so far has really not worked. And in my view, regulation really is the only way forward. I think governments need to mandate, otherwise the rate of change will continue to be very slow.
I'd agree with that. And Eva, what's the point of view from the brand on, regulations and certifications, right? I think there's a push for many of these things. So I'm curious of your opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you as well on the regulations, that I think regulation is now the missing piece of the puzzle to really scale circularity in the industry, both in terms of ensuring the transparency that we talked about already during this panel, but also to create a level playing field for brands that are operating in a circular way and brands that are operating in a linear way. Because currently, when you do things in a circular way, there's a lot of costs involved, and it is just in terms of if you would create financial benefits for players who are truly operating in a circular way, not just using only 5% of recycled fibers, let's say, but really like implement a take back, have a reverse supply chain, really taking responsibilities that would create a lot of scale for brands who really start seriously looking at this model. And I think that when you look at certifications, this is a bit of a difficult topic, because as a brand also, we noticed that that certifications are lacking. They cannot provide us the framework that we need to do things better as an industry. But there is a growing demand from consumers. So there's consumers on one hand who are asking us about specific certifications. Consumers are also becoming more and more aware and knowledgeable on what specific certifications mean. But then at the other hand, we see that certifications are also lacking in providing, for example, traceability, or to really verify where a material is coming from. So it's a difficult playing field, and we're trying to choose then the certification that we really stand behind, like for example GRS, or company level certifications like B Corp. So it's you have to pick your battles, I would say.
So I think, this is the truth session. So, and I think that when it comes to things like regulations, I can remember years ago saying, people were talking in this huge ballroom about all the things that needed to happen. This was primarily about chemicals. And I said, oh, you guys are talking about regulation. Everybody went, oh, like, no, of course we don't want regulation. But I think the tide has turned on that. I think people recognize that, if we want to move to circularity and we want to do it at scale, we're going to need some support for the industry. So maybe kind of real quick, if everybody could say, it'd be really fascinating to get a point of, okay, what's one regulation you support and one that you would oppose? Michael, shall we start with you?
Well, I think that in the coming weeks, I believe that the European Union are going to bring in the extended producer responsibility law. And I think they're claiming that, if it's implemented properly, that, it'll improve circularity, it'll attempt to stop overproduction, empower consumers to make more responsible choices, and probably try and dissuade brands to stop making so much product. And I welcome that. And what I also would welcome, but I personally don't think it will ever happen, is to see a small levy on all garments sold, and those monies to be ring fenced and go back into the industry as an R&D fund. And I think that would really accelerate developments in that area.
Great. Anne.
Well, I must say that I'm in a way a bit afraid of regulation, because if you try to regulate something that you don't really understand too well, you might distort the market into a wrong direction. Like, for example, the waste licensing and waste management is giving currently too much power to traders, waste management companies, whereas it's distorting the market in a way. But I would always vote for regulation that would call out for collection of data and getting statistics and market insight that is completely missing right now. It's like we have been trying to find a good dialogue with the public sector audience to offer the data that we have, but it's just, there's no place to land it right now. So that's an area we're still investigating.
It's interesting. Eva, we've only got a very short period of time. Do you have something really quickly that you would either support or oppose?
Yeah, I am also very much looking forward to the rollout of the extended producer responsibility. Very curious to see the exact form it will take, because it has potential to solve some of the problems we mentioned today.
Great. So we have one last video on reverse logistics, and I think Joanne could tee that up.
Sending back an online order has never been easier. It's often free for the customer. Refunds can be instant. You can drop off Amazon items at Kohl's, UPS, or Whole Foods without boxing it up or even printing a label. Sometimes Amazon even tells you to keep it. But the truth is, there's no such thing as a free return.
Somebody has to pay for that. And it's falling back on either Amazon or the third-party seller. It comes out of their bottom line and inevitably makes prices go higher.
In 2021, $761 billion worth of merchandise was returned, and more than 10% of those returns were fraudulent. And sellers told us they simply end up throwing away about a third of returns.
From all those returns, there's now nearly 6 billion pounds of landfill waste generated a year and 16 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. That's the equivalent of waste produced by 3.3 million Americans in a year.
UPS predicts a 10% increase in returns compared to last holiday season, meaning more waste and expense for all online retailers. At the head of the pack, Amazon has received mounting criticism over the destruction of millions of items. Now Amazon says it's working toward a goal of zero product disposal. It started refurbishing, reselling, and now sending pallets of returns to be auctioned off on the booming liquidation market.
So let's talk about reverse logistics. And it's sort of that's right up your alley, right? In terms of the kinds of work that Reverse Resources is doing. What's the most important point we need to know about a reverse logistics system?
I guess the first thing is that there needs to be a system.
It's a good point.
I think there is like an ideal world where all those products are reorganized into this logic of resales and redistribution. And obviously we should even before that talk about avoiding this in the first place. But I guess already that is a better step if these returned items kind of follow the same logic as post-consumer waste management in general, that there is this resales first and only those products that really can't be resold get into recycling. And I think there is a huge work that still needs to be done on that post-consumer waste management. And I would say that I'm not too much an expert on that post-consumer management, more on just the recycling side of it, but when their materials really are supposed to go to that recycling. And in that sense, I'm so happy to see that those technologies around identifying the exact composition of waste, composition of the material, so that it is actually possible to match that with somebody who would use that in the recycling process, is kind of a missing link in the whole system. And because if you have too much of that part that you can't reuse or resale at a fair price, and that recycling is too expensive, then that's why it ends up in incineration or landfill right now. But I would say that there are really clear steps that can be taken, and that it is a very systemic problem, but it is, and it is a lot about feasibility and all that. But I think there is a very clear route towards having a system set up that works, and the recycling industry is really starting to boom over the coming years. So I'm really optimistic that it's going to be solved quite soon.
We like optimism. Eva, from your perspective, because you're at the brand perspective, tell us about reverse logistics from in your world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how we set it up is we work with harvesting periods. So the customers that were honest, whenever they don't need or can or want to wear their jeans anymore, they can always send them back to us, and we will then sort them out based together also with other jeans from other brands that we collect. And we do this together with a sorter where they really sort on quality, so they really look first if the garments are still fit for a good second life, they will be resold. Some part is also really dirty and just polluted with oil stains, paint stains, or very high percentage of stretch. And then talking about the jeans from other brands that we collect as well, they will be downcycled. And then the remainder of that's really what we can use as our raw material. And we're trying to keep this as local as possible, but there is no universal system yet that we can tap into. There is no supply chain, or there's no logistical services that we can use to organize this. So it was really something that we had to organize ourselves, working with partners, using a reusable packaging that we can use to ship our jeans to our customers, that they can later use them to return the pair for recycling. So it was really a lot of finding different partners that we could work with on this. So if it would scale in a more uniform way, it would also help us greatly to scale this further.
Great, thanks. Michael, do you have any comments on, reverse logistics? I'm sure even at Lenzing, you guys are, you're trying to incorporate the post-industrial and the post-consumer. What are you finding with a system of getting those materials back?
I don't know if I really have a view on it, actually. I mean, the whole thing about ordering 10 garments online, knowing that you're going to return 9 of them or whatever. It's just shocking. And I think the problem for our industry, I mean, I've seen, I'm not answering the question here, I'm answering another question, but I've seen a certain organization who talks a lot about recycling, and I've been to several presentations, and they often compare the car industry with the garment industry, as if we should follow the model of the car industry. Well, the car industry is, you know, high tech, high margin, and our industry is low tech, low margin. And I don't see that anybody sees any value in secondhand goods. They are what they are. They're just waste. And we have at least 1 or 2 generations who've grown up and thinking that garments are super cheap. And so
Actually
if they're
knowing
returned,
they are, because they are.
well, they are.
It's not a thought.
And so if they're returned, I mean, almost it's easier for a retailer or brand just to get rid of them or burn them or whatever else.
Right.
So I think we've got ourselves into this situation, which, you know, it isn't clear how we get out of it.
It's interesting in some conversations that we've had, and the need for there to be a reverse logistics system. I mean, this goes back to the systems, right? Generally speaking, we need lots of systems to created so that circularity works. And one of those things is really some kind of reverse logistics that creates almost like a refinery, so those materials then can go to the appropriate places to be reused. We're coming on to our time here. So what I would like to do is to ask each panelist from your perspective, what would be a call to action? We've got everybody has about 30 seconds to, you know, what would be your call to action to make the circular system and recycling work today or in the near future? Who would like to start off?
I can start.
Great, thanks, Anne.
I think the main thing I keep on saying is that every person on this planet needs to understand which circle am I participating in. This whole logic of Bea Johnson, who is really making sure that she does not accept things in her life that she doesn't know what to do with or where it is going in that next cycle. We don't need to kind of think about this as a limiting factor that I stop consuming or I stopped participating in the circulation. But I need to understand which circulation am I participating with every product, every material, every choice that I make. And that applies on us as a consumer as well as a producer, or like whichever role you're playing in that circulation. And that helps. As soon as we start thinking about that, I won't buy things from Amazon again, and I don't throw that in a box unless I actually know what's going to happen to that next. If I just put my mind to it for a moment.
Great, thanks, Anne. Michael, what's your call to action?
You've put me on the spot. I hadn't really thought about this. I think let's stop the talking. You know, if you are a company who market themselves on the back of this, including many other things, we need more action. I would say, you know, more walking than talking. So that's a call to action. But the other call to action, which will take much longer, and this is my answer to most things in this area, is that sustainability or environmentalism has to be taught at school. You know, if you see a label or a website or something that is talking about sustainability in the environment, a lot of things are related to science, claims about things being scientific claims. And I think if people don't understand them, they don't engage with them. But if you are brought up and think these things are taught at school at an early age, and it becomes natural to you, I think you are much more likely to be able to understand the issues. And I don't think a lot of people understand the issues nowadays, so they don't engage.
Cool. And Eva.
Great question. I think as an industry, we need to put an equal amount of weight around the concepts of reuse and reduce as we do around recycling. There's a lot of players who are implementing bits and pieces of the circular economy or the circular methodology, just doing some cherry picking, which is dangerous because it's kind of misusing the circular model. And I think if we would look with an equal amount of attention and importance as at reduce and reuse as we do as recycling, there is a lot of impact that we could generate.
Great, thank you. Well, if I, you guys had so many great things that you brought up today, it seems to me that there are a couple of reoccurring themes, and that is this circularity needs to be a system, right? One of the great things I talked about it early on about, it's in a circular system, everything is interconnected. The truth is we are interconnected, we always have been, but we've acted as if we're not. That if we throw something away, it goes away, so that we're not connected to that anymore. We've learned that that's not the case. So a circular system has to be implemented, and it has to be implemented at scale. It can't be done just a little bit here and a little bit here. It's got to be everything and all encompassing. And today we're missing a lot of the pieces of that system. We're missing the data that we need to implement those systems. And education, right? That if we can create that data, we will start to be able to create the kind of educational information and learnings that will allow this to develop further and to be more robust. So scaling circularity systems, I think, is critical. I think, as to Michael's point, we really need to be taking action, and we need to have everybody involved. I like a point that Anne made earlier that, this is still global. Everybody wears clothes. So these materials need to be pulled into the global system. With that, I'm going to ask Annie to join us and to see if she has some Q&A from the people who have joined us today.
Yes, thank you all for your insights. And we definitely do have a couple of questions from the audience to get to. We'll first start with Sandra. This is a direct question to Anne, actually. So how is Reverse Resources currently tackling the transparency / lack of information problem until regulations might come up?
Thank you. We are using the business interest and this chicken and egg problem actually to solve this by itself. So the biggest bottleneck or challenge that right now for the recyclers to access the right textile waste that is best for their use case is to have it segregated at the source together with the full background information from the factory. But factories don't naturally want to do that unless somebody demands it from them, even though they can then get better price for the waste. And because we don't have regulation and policy to kick in, we are actually collaborating with the largest brands, their largest clients, to go to them and ask them that, hey, if you want to collaborate and keep on working with us, we need you to start segregating of your waste. So the brand is asking it from the factory for the benefit of the recycler to get that material back in recycled form. So we are creating that circle of interest there.
You're creating that system in place, right? Thanks, Anne. And next question, this is open to anyone who wishes to chime in, from Laura. I think it's more, this is a very interesting one. So isn't the danger, we're talking about systems here, but isn't the danger a bit that systems on systems on systems has made the whole ecosystem very complicated? Another comment from this same question is, who will be brave enough to break away and build one truly revolutionary circular system from scratch, which answers all the problems we are currently facing? Who wants to take a crack at commenting on that one?
I can comment on that one. And then, certainly. But what I would say to Laura is that I don't think we're creating systems on systems and systems, right? I think that as an industry, there are systems in place and those aren't necessarily good systems, right? So there are changes that need to happen for us to understand, and it's going to take education and it's going to take change. You in your question, you talk about who's going to make big enough changes. These are going to be big changes, but we have to work with what's there. There is millions of tons of clothing going into landfill and incineration today. There are millions of tons of materials being shipped to the global south today. Those are systems that are in place that we'd like to break in some instances, or we'd like to change and make better. If we're going to be positive, we have to look at what works. Michael alluded to that early on, and make sure that if there are things that work, that we don't throw those away, that they get used, right? If there are steps we can take that do function. I think that's really important.
And Anne?
I'd add to this that to disrupt the system, you first need to understand really well how the system functions right now. And I look at it as like acupuncture, that you put a needle into the right place, then the whole system reacts to that. But the difficulty is to find what is the right place, where you start kind of putting pressure on to create a systemic change. So I agree, it's not creating system on system, but it is trying to disrupt the current system to behave better.
Okay. And Michael or Eva, do you want to comment on this, or shall we move on to the next question?
I think the reality of the situation is that it is complex and systems are complex. I remember, I think it was around 2011, there was a textile exchange conference in New York, and the last speaker who got up on the stage was the founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard. And he outed this secret society of brands who've been meeting in secret. And this turned into what has become the Higg index today. So they wanted to get rid of all the complex certifications and everything else, the 70 or 100 and more, and just have one index that covered the whole supply chain. And now we're in 2022 and that still hasn't happened because it's very complicated. And I think that is the problem. But I also think that there is an element of perfect is the enemy of good enough. That a lot of rules and regulations that are being made by people who've never been inside a textile factory ever are just too strict, and they just don't fit with the real world. But I will circle back and say it's complicated because it's complicated.
It's always complex, isn't it? But we have time for about one more minute one more question. And this, we spoke about Eva using mono monofabrics and also cellulosic materials. This one has to do specifically towards recycling polyester into new fibers. So currently recycling polyester into new fibers are gaining in popularity, like PET bottles retrieved from the ocean into swimwear, etc. But since these recycled fibers tend to release a lot of microplastics during the wash, due to the fibers becoming damaged during recycling, how do you think it will take, or how long do you think it will take before the fashion industry decides to move away from using polyester altogether?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It makes the hairs on my arms stand up when I see jeans that had recycled PET coming from ocean plastic and then being labeled as circular. Yeah, all the reasons that that are highlighted in the question are indeed very valid. I mean, yeah, it doesn't make any sense to blend a synthetic material with a natural material if both of those materials have separate developed recycling streams. I think what I read a couple weeks ago from, I think it was a piece from the New Standard Institute, where they kind of, yeah, where they surfaced or where they exposed the fact that when you take bottles or you take PET bottles and you recycle them into garments, you're actually disrupting a recycling stream that has been developed to recycle these PET bottles in a closed loop. You're kind of disrupting that and putting into a garment where there is no such stream developed yet. So I think definitely this needs to be implemented. Also, I was hoping really it would be reflected in the EPR system, the whole problematic of microplastic, but it seems it's not going to be the case yet. So I'm hoping that there will be more awareness in the industry altogether, and hopefully also pushed by regulation to kind of shift the tide, because indeed it's not contributing to something good.
Perfect. I would want to weigh in and make sure that we talked about dealing with reality here. Today in the world, 53 million tons a year of polyester are made for the fiber industry. Textiles and apparel and fiber industry, right? It's lots of different segments. So there's an enormous amount of this material being produced today. I think that we have to figure out ways to use that so that we don't have these microfiber problems. I think that question was geared towards mechanically recycling polyester. If you chemically recycle polyester, that's a different profile. There are people that are working on that kind of thing. I'm not saying that I'm sitting here and I have on no polyester. I don't wear it personally, but we have to deal with the reality of the situation. And the reality is it is more than double any other, the closest second fiber, which is cotton, which is only around 24 million tons a year, right? And so at 50 some odd million tons a year, we're going to have to figure out in a positive way what to do with these materials.
I just would comment here that I think it's super important that we don't talk about circularity in the context of what are we going to do with waste. But once we start looking at the goal of circularity to reduce the use of virgin materials, then the whole angle gets to another side of it, where we are talking about scarcity of materials that are circulating, right? And then we're starting to get into actual solutions.
Thanks for weighing in on that, everyone. Last question before we leave. Karla, you mentioned a book at the beginning of the webinar. Would you mind repeating that book for anyone who wishes to read that afterwards this panel?
Sure. The name of the book is, I'm really bad at remembering this, so I have to look it up. It's called The Business of Less.
Business of Less, for anyone who would like to read it. But thank you so much all for your questions, and to everyone for answering with your expertise. We would like to bring Miguel back on as we close out this discussion. And we'd also like to announce that we are having our next webinar on May 3rd that will be discussing how to manage carbon in fashion. So we'll put a link in the chat box as well for registration. Hi, Miguel.
Yeah, thank you. Well, when we were discussing the topics for this season of the truth, and we thought about waste, we thought, okay, that's going to be complex. It's going to be very, very complex. And after the discussions that we had today, and thanks to Karla, Eva, Anna, and Michael, yes, we can confirm this. It's very complex, but at least there are people doing something, okay? So we are still crawling, probably. We're still a long way to go until all the systems are in place and there's a good collaboration and there are regulations and everything is, you know, good for recycling waste. But at least, okay, we are moving on. Okay, this is a good thing. I hope that the audience has taken many lessons. They have learned a lot about the real meaning, the real situation of waste and recycling and upcycling as well. And that they will feel more, you know, encouraged to adopt and go for recycled materials. I mean, it's not good to build mountains of clothes in Ghana, as was shown on the video, or the amount of millions of tons that Karl mentioned. I mean, that makes no sense. I mean, this is called Earth. Otherwise, in 100 years, the planet is going to be called waste. No, we should fight that. We should really do something good with waste. And there are plenty of ideas and plenty of people that are doing great stuff. So on behalf of the foundation, Eva, Michael, Anne, thanks very much. Karla, many, many thanks for your wonderful moderation and your comments. And okay, so we are going to start working now on the next episode. As Annie mentioned, it's going to be about carbon. And well, we will communicate on our media about, yes, schedules and the speakers and everything. So many thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are. And hopefully we can see again each other soon. Live is possible. Okay. Thanks very much all.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, y'all. Bye.